CO, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Vince Feeling, and I am a technical assistant specialist with CCO. And today we're going to go over the Open Meetings and Records Act. This is a very, very important matter, very important subject to go over. The bulk of this presentation will revolve around the Open Meeting Act itself, the Open Records Act. We will actually touch on briefly and just hit the high points of it. But yeah, let's move on. The Open Meeting Act, we're going to start with that. A little bit of history. This has been around since 1977. That will be on the test, 1977. Okay, yeah. It's actually gone through a lot of changes over the years. And it is pretty much a living, breathing law because I'm pretty sure that it's going to keep on going through changes as time evolves and as technology evolves and whatnot. So the Open Meeting Act, what we're going to cover today, the whens and the whats. Like when is the act itself set in motion? Going to cover what actions have to be taken before the meetings. So there's a lot of work involved before you actually have a board meeting, and that's what we're going to cover there. What procedures have to be followed during the meetings in order to comply with this particular act, and what kind of consequences are there for violating this act. And yes, there are consequences for this. Why do we do this? Why are we doing this? Why are we providing this training? Well, for one, it'll give you your technical assistance hours, your TA hours. But the main thing is, why are we doing this? Because it's the law. And you cannot get around this. Now, a little caveat, I am not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. But you have been given copies of each act. That's what this is, pretty much one per group. This particular document that you have supersedes anything that I say, supersedes anything that's on my PowerPoint. So always go to this first. And yeah. It's very important. I cannot stress enough how important the Open Meeting Act is. When is it triggered? When is this act triggered? When is this law triggered? Well, it's anytime a public body has a meeting. Anytime that you are in a meeting situation discussing business. In a majority setting, anytime an organization has a meeting, that's when this act is triggered. So what is a public body? So a public body is pretty much your organization. The 501c3s that we all work with, those are public bodies. Those are public entities. So governing bodies of municipalities, this would also include corporations. Your organization may be incorporated or be an LLC. Corporations also fall under this as well. The boards and the committees of your organizations also fall under this as well. Any board with decision-making authority, able to make decisions, and those that are entrusted with expending funds, be it grant money, donations, raised money from fundraisers. That pretty much, these four things constitute a public body, which pretty much is every organization that we work with, every 501c organization. What is a meeting? Well, when conducting business of a public body, that's pretty much what a meeting is. Anytime they get together and people are conducting business of a public body, that's what a meeting is. And a majority of its members are there. You cannot conduct a meeting, you cannot have a meeting unless you have a majority. That's the law. Being personally together doesn't necessarily constitute a meeting. However, this is one thing that you really do have to be careful with. Say, for instance, you have some new board members and you're a member of the board and you invite all these board members to your house for dinner. So you have a majority of the board there. At your house for dinner, informally, you're not talking about business, you're just having a good time trying to get to know each other. And then something happens, somebody may ask, well, what do you think about this thing that we're going to be talking about this next business meeting? Well, I might be doing this, I'm thinking about voting this way, let me ask somebody this, and then you all are starting to talk about business. For one thing, the majority of your members are there, you're talking about business, so you could have enacted this act, and you would be in violation of that. So it's just good practice to not talk about business whenever a majority of you all are together. Like birthday parties, gatherings at parks and stuff like that. It's just good practice not to talk about business in order to comply with this act. There are 4 types of meetings: regularly scheduled meetings, special meetings, continued or reconvened meetings, and emergency meetings. And emergency meetings are something that we're just going to briefly touch on. They are very dangerous, and if at all costs, try to avoid emergency meetings. And we'll get to that shortly. Also, no executive sessions. Executive session, as far as actually, if you want to discuss business in private, you cannot call an executive session. I've seen this happen many times. School boards, churches, whenever they want to talk about something in private, they would call an executive session, and then they would go into a closed room, and then they would continue to talk about business. I've seen this. You can't do that. Every action that the board does, there are some exceptions. But every action that the board does has to be noted and recorded. Yeah.
Does that include like our tribal council meetings, or is it okay to do that? Because they do that all the time.
The times that, it's kind of,
They'll go into executive session and kick everybody out.
well, the way it is set up, it's hard to say. Boss?
Can I answer? Okay,
Absolutely.
so, first of all, really before you ever go into an executive session, it needs to be an HR decision or if you have employees or staff. So basically, very few of our organizations have employees or staff. They're volunteers. So you just need to be very careful about that. The Cherokee Nation itself is its own sovereign government, so they do not have to, they follow their laws, so they do not have to abide by the Oklahoma Open Meetings Act.
I thought it said that I wanted to say it out loud.
That's a good
I
question.
wanted you to say it out loud.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Because I wondered if other people were thinking about that, because they do it all the time.
So, pre-meeting actions. There are things that you have to do before the meeting even begins. One is you have to provide notice of the meeting. Have to let your public know where the meeting is and whatnot. And you also have to post the agenda. So these 2 things are the pre-meeting actions that you have to do. To provide initial notice of regular meetings, and as you can see that the actual title and the statute sections are here, so you can actually kind of follow along, or if you want to do some more research later, that is what those are. And that is, as I said, full legal jargon. That's sometimes kind of difficult for people to understand, but hopefully we're going to be able to break all that down here. So when do you provide initial notice of your regular meetings? Well, you have to do it annually. You have to do it every year by December 15th for your regular meetings for the next calendar year. You have to include the date, time, and the place of your meetings. To whom do you have to provide this? Well, you have to provide it to the county clerk of the county where your body is principally located. So, and when you take it there, it will be notarized and will be a matter of public record. So, providing notice of special meetings. Say, for instance, something happens where you have to discuss something or vote on something before your regular meeting, and it's kind of important. A special meeting can be called. You have to have 48 hours notice of date, time, and place. Notice is actually posting your agenda. Notice in writing, in person, or by telephone to the proper record-keeping official and to those who have filed written requests to receive a notice of the meeting. So pretty much everybody in your organization, people that want to know about it, you have to provide them with 48 hours if you're going to have a special meeting. At this particular meeting, a special meeting, no new business is permissible. If you're going to have a special meeting, you are discussing one item of business. I don't see why you would need a couple items of business for a special meeting, but really you should only be discussing just one item of business, or else you don't really need the special meeting. Yeah. And if at all possible, if it can wait, if the article of business that you're discussing can wait until your next regular meeting, at all costs, try to do that. Try to do that. It just helps simplify a lot of things. Providing notice of continued or reconvened meetings. First of all, you need your date, time, and place of the meeting. And that must be announced at the original meeting. So if you're in a meeting, and sometimes meetings have to adjourn abruptly, or sometimes you even lose your quorum. Maybe something happens and a member has to leave early. You have to have a quorum in order to conduct business. And if a member leaves early, you've lost your quorum. So you can't really conduct any business. Now you can stay and talk to one another, of course, but you can't actually do any action. You can't take care of any business if you do not have a quorum. So you can actually continue the meeting at a later date. But whenever you continue the meeting at a later date, only the items on the original agenda may be discussed. You're going by that original agenda. So whenever you do a meeting, and you have maybe 5 items on the agenda for that particular meeting, and you get to 3 of them, and you have to adjourn, and you have to continue it at a later date. You have 2 items, and that's the only items that you have to talk about whenever you reconvene your meeting at a later date. So you have to go by the agenda of the original meeting date. Providing notice of emergency meetings. Emergency meetings sometimes get confused with special meetings. And although you can have emergency meetings, it's best not to really. But there are circumstances in which this act actually allows you to have emergency meetings. But as I said, a lot of people get kind of confused between the definitions of an emergency meeting and a special meeting. But by all means, if the article of business can wait until the next regular meeting, hold it and discuss it at the next regular meeting. So let's go ahead and continue with a little bit more. The organization must give only the advanced public notice that is reasonable under the circumstances, and we'll get into that a little bit deeper here in a minute. Give notice as soon as possible, whether in person, by phone, or website. Posting the meeting's agenda, and we'll get back and we'll be able to discuss the emergency meeting situation here in a little bit. Posting the meeting's agenda. For your regular meetings, your agendas have to be posted 24 hours prior to your meeting. And the agendas have to be posted publicly in prominent view. It's best practice to actually have it on the door of the building where you are actually meeting. Now, I understand that some organizations that we work with don't have any community buildings, but it still needs to be posted at the place where you are actually physically having your meetings. So you still have to post it. Regular meetings have to be posted 24 hours prior. The 24-hour period excludes Saturday, Sunday, and Oklahoma state holidays. Consider this whenever you're posting it. Sometimes it gets kind of difficult to sometimes have a meeting maybe on a Monday and you post it on Friday. However, you can't include Saturday, Sunday, and any holidays that fall in between there. But it has to have 24 hours to be posted at the place where you are meeting.
Do you only have to post it there, or do you have to send it to your board ahead of time too?
You can do that. You don't necessarily you do have to post it there, but it's recommended that you have other places to post it as well. Yeah. Send it to your board members, or post it maybe at some organizations actually post in certain grocery stores in the town. There's boards and everybody knows that that's where it's posted at.
Like our website or something?
You can post on the website, but that's not sufficient enough. It still has to be posted on the door, physically on the door.
Right,
But
you can do that too.
yes, you can do that. Posted at the principal office. If no office exists, posted at the meeting location. And public bodies should post regularly scheduled meetings on its website, but website posting is not an accurate substitute under the OMA. So you can do that, but just make sure that you actually post it at the place where your meeting is actually held. Take a look at agendas. Just remember that you cannot take action if the action is not on the agenda. Any new business has to be put on the agenda. And of course, the agenda has to be posted either 48 or 24, depending on what the meeting calls for. But any new business has to be posted on the agenda. And if it's not on there, you cannot take action. However, there are ways to amend agendas, but it's not really good practice to keep mending agendas all the time. So some people may question ethics of an organization that continues to amend agendas before their meetings. So just keep that in mind. Agendas cannot be vague. They have to pretty much have simple wording where everybody can understand them. There's a court case that comes to mind for this particular subject. There was a board of education that was sued. Somebody brought suit because they hired a superintendent during one of their business meetings. The Board of Education did post an agenda, but however, the agenda was posted in two different places, and it happened to be two different agendas, but there was only just two words changed in it. So one of the agendas, the items of new business read, discuss hiring an administrator, and the other agenda said interview a superintendent. So a lot of people do realize that a superintendent is a school administrator, and they went ahead and hired the superintendent. However, because there were two agendas, and one agenda just said that they were going to discuss hiring the administrator or the superintendent, they were sued and their validity was questioned because of the two different agendas. And because one agenda they did interview, and one agenda said they were just going to discuss and then move on. But they
Sued by who?
Hmm?
Who sued them?
just a person,
Just a random.
just a random. Anybody can bring a suit against an organization. Anybody can, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But yeah, anybody can bring a suit. There's people out there that actually have eyes for this stuff. They're looking. So during the meeting, we're going to take a look at first of all where to hold meetings. We're going to take a look at voting, taking minutes, and how to discuss new business, and how to continue or reconvene a meeting. A lot of this stuff is refresher, maybe rehash in some cases, but I still believe that it is equally important, especially since we're talking about this act. When and where to hold meetings. It says meetings shall be held at specified times and places which are convenient to the public. Whenever you're thinking about when and where you're having your meeting, think about a time when most of your members of your organization can actually attend. So it's not saying to have your meeting at 11 or at midnight on any night. Have it at a time where most normal people voting. The vote of each member must be publicly cast because it needs to be recorded in the minutes. The minutes are your official practice, just to go through and write down exactly how everybody voted, even if it was unanimous. Electronic and telephonic communications. This is actually where the act has a lot of changes over the years, and honestly, with technology advancing the way it is, I foresee changes in the future, and they have actually reserved areas for change in this particular section of the act. Deciding or taking action. So let's have a few hypothetical situations here. Let's see. Say for instance, somebody is not able to make it to the meeting, and they decide to call the president, and because they have the agenda, they've had it 24 hours or they've had it 48 hours in advance, and they told them, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it there, but I want to vote yes on these things, and I want to vote no on these things. Can you do that? Can a person do that and not physically be at the meeting? Anybody?
Yeah.
No,
Really?
Yeah, but
you can't. Flunk. Can't do it. Flunk.
can they phone in though?
Teleconferencing, yes, they can, but just actually, hey, I want to vote this way, bye. They can't do that.
Right.
Yeah. Teleconferencing, yes. And we'll actually get to that deeper here in a little bit. Email, same way. Can somebody email, like do a group email and discuss business and actually vote through an email? Can that be done? Can't. Can't do it. Can't do it. And actually, you've got to be careful if you're discussing business about your organization through an email. If you have multiple people on there, and those people are, for instance, voting members of your board, and there's a majority there, and you're discussing business through the email, you've actually opened a meeting, a business meeting, and a legal meeting, because nobody else can see those emails. The public can't see those emails. So you've got to be careful about using email whenever you're discussing business about your organization. Minutes. Minutes must be written, and they must include the official summary of the proceeding. It must include pretty much everything that was talked about, any actions that were done. Must ID all the members that were present, pretty much all voting members that were present. You have to do that in order to establish a quorum. You must identify all the matters considered, all the business that was considered. You must identify all the actions taken, seconds, motions, did it pass or not? You must identify all of those. And any person actually can come in to your meetings. Your meetings are open to the public, and any person can actually come in and record the meeting by either maybe a video camera, phone, audio. They can come in and record it, provided that it does not interfere with the meeting. Anybody can do that pretty much as long as they're not a nuisance to your meeting and interfering with your meeting. Pretty much anybody can do that. Yes, ma'am.
Do they have to tell you that they're recording it?
No,
They don't?
they can do it. Yeah, it's an open meeting. It's public. You are a public organization. Yeah, no, they don't have to tell you. They can do it. New business. New business is pretty much any matter not known about which could not have been reasonably foreseen prior to the time of posting of the agenda. So pretty much is pretty much any matter that you're wanting to discuss, really, that's new, that you haven't discussed it previously. To consider new business at a regular meeting, it has to be posted on the agenda. It has to be listed on the agenda if you want to discuss it. If you want to take action on it, it has to be listed on the agenda. New business is not what someone forgot needed to be on the agenda. That kind of goes back to what they call a duty of care. It's up to each member of your organization, especially the voting body, to actually know what's going on in your organization. So they should know what business should be coming. You know, that, as I said, goes back to what they call duty of care. And it's hard work doing 501c3 work. It really is difficult. It really is. But there's certain things that you really do. And one thing is you have to care about what you're doing. You really do. No new business in a special or emergency meeting. As I said, in a special or emergency meeting, those meetings are called for specific purposes, specific items of business, and that's it. Just those specific items of business, and you have to adjourn. That's it. How to continue or reconvene a meeting. And this is like, for instance, you lose a quorum, somebody has to leave early or whatnot. Let's see, to finish business appearing on an agenda of a previous meeting. So that's talking about the actual meeting itself after it's already been adjourned, and you would have to discuss business in a later date. This is actually coming back, reconvening. At the original meeting, you have to announce the date, time, and the place where the continuance of the meeting is going to happen. You have to do that at the original meeting. At the continued meeting, only matters discussed on the agenda from the previous meeting may be discussed. And there's no new business at the reconvene meeting. It's just the matters that was on the agenda. Can't have any new business there. Holding a special meeting. A special meeting is any meeting of a public body, any meeting of an organization other than a regularly scheduled meeting or emergency meeting. So there are times when you have to do this. Call a special meeting in order to get certain aspects of business done. Sometimes it just can't wait until the next regular meeting. Sometimes you actually have to call a special meeting. You have to give proper public notice of at least 48 hours in advance for a special meeting, as opposed to the 24 hours for a regular meeting. The agenda has to be posted 48 hours in advance. And of course, the holidays and weekends still is factored into that as well. You cannot count those. And once again, no new business at a special meeting. It's just called for one specific purpose, maybe a couple specific purposes, but other than that, you cannot discuss anything else during that meeting. How to hold an emergency meeting. A meeting convened to deal with an emergency. And there's actually definition in the law about what constitutes an emergency. So pretty much it's injury to a person, or injury or damage to personal or public property, or extreme financial loss. And there's going to be another slide that actually states the exact wording of it. But those three things, if you're meeting, if the item of business that you're wanting to discuss does not meet those three criteria, you cannot call an emergency meeting. You actually have to call a special meeting. And that right there is kind of a gray area, and it really gets confusing to a lot of people. But the way that I kind of see it is try not to call emergency meetings a lot, because if you just call emergency meeting after emergency meeting, sometimes people may begin to question the ethics of your organization. That's something that you don't want. The act itself, really, the main thing of it is to promote transparency, so everybody can see what your organization is doing. That's the main purpose of this act. There we go. Situation involving injury to persons or injury and damage to public or personal property or immediate financial loss. That criteria right there, if what you're wanting to discuss does not meet this criteria, a special meeting has to be called. And really, you cannot use an emergency meeting. And for emergencies, of course, you kind of you have to give as much notice as possible and reasonable under the circumstances. And really, the times that you have to call an emergency meeting, the circumstances are extreme. So just give as much as you can of a notice to your organization members. Yeah. And no new business. It's just what the only thing that you can discuss is what item of business is the emergency and nothing else. But I would say try not to do any emergency meetings. You can have them, they're in the law, but in order to keep your transparency, keep things simple, try to keep your meetings on the regular meeting, or call a special meeting. But of course, it just depends on the circumstances, and you just have to use your best judgment on that. There's always that gray area whenever you're calling an emergency meeting. Teleconferencing. Let's see, what time do we have here? All right. Teleconferencing. This is one that has kind of evolved over the years, and I honestly believe that it's going to continue to evolve. Whenever you're having a meeting, you can do teleconferencing. But certain conditions must be met. For one, you have to have audio and visual at each site of the teleconference meeting, so that everybody can see the person, everybody can hear the person, and so the public can be involved at the different sites. I don't think that really pertains to most of our organizations, but we're just going to cover this because it's still permissible, and sometimes it might actually help your organization out. You must have a quorum of your organization at the agenda site. So the main site where you're having your meeting, you must have a quorum.
So the person calling in can't be part of that quorum?
They can.
Okay.
Yes, they can.
Because we have one board member that lives in, he lives in Tulsa, and so he comes when he can, but
Mhm.
he also works out, like in Oklahoma City and out of state sometimes, and so he
Yeah.
calls in a lot.
Yeah.
So,
Can?
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you're golden. You're golden. Notice an agenda must list the video sites. So if there are other sites that, say for instance, you have your central area where your meeting is going to be held, and then you have other video sites available so public can come and actually view the meeting, the notice and agenda must also list those websites like YouTube or the actual physical site where people can actually go. Maybe it's CCTV or something like that. You must the agenda and the notice must also list those sites. The notice and agenda must identify each member and site from which each will participate. Public must have access to all sites, including the off-site location talked about previously. And you can't have executive sessions whenever you're dealing with teleconferencing or video conferencing. You can't go into executive sessions. Violations of the act. I think that might be a good time to actually take some questions, and after we take these questions, we'll actually go take a 10-minute break. So I'll open the floor up to any questions that anybody may have. It's a lot of stuff. It's pretty deep. It's pretty dry, but this is very important, and I'm wanting to get. I'm wanting to help you all. So yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, I was trying to save this question.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, so when you reschedule, like, let's say, our meeting was last week.
Okay.
I was gonna say it.
Yeah.
Our meeting was regularly scheduled for last week,
Mhm.
and we did not have a quorum show up.
Okay.
So, what I did was I put notice on our Facebook and, sent it out to the board members and all that stuff about that, you know, we didn't have a quorum, we're gonna reschedule for next week. Can we do that? Because I did it immediately, so it was the whole week in advance.
Let the boss handle this one, boss.
Can we do that?
Absolutely. So basically, did you have important information, Anita, that really needed to be taken care of within that week timeframe, or was it information that probably could have been postponed to the?
It really needs to,
We've got a big project coming up, and we're already running behind on it, and we really need to meet.
Okay, so this is that gray area that we just entered. So you said basically it was important information. So yes, they have the legal right, they've given a week's notice, they have items that need to be discussed, and they cannot be held off till the following month.
and
So-
see, we already had missed the ones before because of weather.
Right, so absolutely. It may fall under the special meeting.
Okay, I need to write that.
That would be the only difference, is it would be a special meeting, and you would follow the items that were on the agenda
Right.
for that meeting, the previous meeting.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions? Any other questions?
If you're doing teleconferencing, does it have to be a live feed, or can it be just posted after the meeting's over?
Yes, it has to be a live feed.
And does it have to be a feed at all, or can it, are you saying it has to be on somewhere?
Teleconferencing,
But I mean.
I used feed literally, so,
Okay,
um,
because to me, if it's a live feed, you're posting it somewhere as a live feed, like on your Facebook or on your
Right.
website or
Right.
something like that. But just to have a video conference, teleconference, video conference, whatever, in the room where everybody can hear, see, whatever that's in the room, is that enough?
Where would the people that are on the other side of the video be? Where would they be from?
I don't know, because you don't know, because we don't
Right.
normally record our meetings.
Right.
So, I mean, I
Right.
would understand that if we were already feeding our meetings, but we don't.
I'm gonna let the director have this one.
If it's a live meeting, then they have to have an opportunity to react in real time.
And then
so
that's
that they can have
fine.
feedback.
Right.
But if it's just a recorded session that you're gonna have later, that's completely
And
different.
that's not
from
really,
this.
that was his question, that's not mine. I was just saying, because he said, because you said feed, and then that made me wonder, does it have to be feeding somewhere? Like onto the
If
internet
you
or
post it,
somewhere?
it's gonna be a live feed or a video.
But we don't have to, right?
No, you don't have to.
That's what I
No.
wanted to know.
Legally, you don't have to do that.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I wanted to know.
You don't have to do that.
If you're gonna do it though, it has to be, like, if you're gonna advertise it as a public meeting and it's gonna be teleconference somewhere else, then it has to be two ways, is what he's saying. It has to be, they have to be able, the people on the other side have to be able to speak and you hear them
Right.
as well, not
And it's
just.
usually just our one board
Right.
member.
Right. Right.
But so, okay, I was just thinking, so if we teleconference, we have to put it on a social media or something?
No.
Or somewhere? Okay,
No.
gotcha.
I would just be careful, excuse me,
Okay.
I would just be very careful when doing teleconference or something like that.
He's the only one that calls in like that. Ty has called in once, and he couldn't be there, but I think that's the only meeting he's not been to.
Just a quick comment, on some conference calls that I have been on in the past, there are usually a lot of problems when people teleconferencing. It's not a good feedback, a lot of times you hear static in the background. So again, just be very careful when you're doing that so that both parties can be heard. A lot of times they get cut off and things like that. So just be careful if you're conducting a official meeting. You may lose that person on the other end of the line, so you don't have a quorum, so just be very careful. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine. I just wondered, is it okay to use FaceTime? Like on your phone?
I'm gonna say, yeah. I would say, yeah. FaceTime and Skype. Any apps or any technology that you have. This part, not that one, but this part is the one that's always evolving. It's always evolving. So in a few years, you may actually see words as Skype or FaceTime in the actual legal language of the act. But I would say, yeah. I would say, yeah, because it's a tool that you're using. Yeah. Did you get your question answered?
Yes.
Okay. With that, let's take a break. Let's take 10 minutes. And I'm sure there's food still in there, so please feel free. Once again, feel free to get some more food. There's plenty in there. This is one thing that everybody wants to know. It seems to be a question that's been brought up a couple times whenever I've told people about the Open Meeting Act and what happens if you violate the act. What happens if an organization violates the act? And really, what happens is actions that are taken in willful violation are invalid. So any business that had been discussed and voted on that wasn't in a regular meeting, a special meeting, an emergency meeting, or a reconvene meeting, say for instance everybody just kind of got together at dinner, there was a majority of the board there, and you guys just started talking about, hey, let's go ahead and try this. Is that a good idea? Yeah, let's do it. Okay, that's cool. Let's go. Let's go ahead and proceed with this. That was an illegal meeting, and whatever you decided at that particular meeting is invalid. It's invalid, pretty much. It does not. It will not hold up in a court of law anywhere. And any person can bring a civil action against the organization, and if you are voting members of your board, that means that you, as a person, are held liable for anything that your board does. So keep that in mind. It's you're in it together. So if your board has an illegal meeting, and for instance maybe you weren't there, doesn't mean that you're off the hook. You are included in that, in your board. So your board is responsible. So all members of the board are responsible for everything that your organization does because it is a public entity. So you got to keep that in mind. Criminal penalty. It is a misdemeanor offense if you do violate this act in any way. It is a misdemeanor offense. It is punishable by fine up to $500 and a year in one of the fine county jails around here. So
Per board member?
that is, yes, per board member.
Do we all get to share a bill?
Well, I don't know. That depends. That depends on the county that you're in, I think. Yeah. That all depends on the county
Carry on.
and the sheriff. You know, that all depends on the jail. But that's one hotel that you don't want to be in. I know they got one in Mays County in Pryor. There's one just right down the road in Tahlequah, Nowata, and so on. But all joking aside, yes, it can very well happen. It can very well happen if this act is violated. It is a misdemeanor offense if you violate this act. But you can correct mistakes if you inadvertently violated the act. Mistakes can be corrected. If not in compliance with the act, when an action is taken, it will be invalid. Just as I said, if you had a meeting, you decided to do something, and if the meeting wasn't in compliance with this act, didn't fall under the 4 meetings that we discussed, 4 types of meetings, it would be invalid because it would be an illegal meeting.
Who do you report that to? Like, what's the hierarchy rank?
Let's see.
Cops, go to judge.
Who would you report that to,
Well,
boss?
you would start with the city. You would start with a complaint to the city officials, and then go up from there to county.
So like court clerk,
State.
pretty much?
It would depend on who you were reporting.
Yes.
I mean, if you were reporting a body that reports to a city government, then you would report to the city government. If you're reporting a body that reports to the county government, say county commissioners or something like that, then you would report it to them. If there was no recourse given in any lower place, then you would report it to the Oklahoma Secretary of State's office, because they're the ones that keep records for nonprofit organizations.
Right on.
So this is how you correct mistakes. In order to validate an action that was done illegally, inadvertently, to ratify that, you pretty much have to give proper public notice and put the item on the next meeting's agenda and pretty much revote and record the decision that you guys were discussing. So it has to be brought before the public body so they have a chance to listen to it, maybe discuss it, and so on. But it has to be recorded, and the only way to do that is to do a revote of something that was discussed when it wasn't in an open meeting setting or during a violation of this. It has to be recorded. In the end, it has everything that your organization does has to be recorded. All right, so that was the Open Meeting Act. Right now, we're going to go move on to Title 51 of the Oklahoma Statute, sections 24A1 through 24A.30. I like to call it the Open Records Act. It just rolls off the tongue better. The purpose of the ORA pretty much is you have the right to be informed of what's going on in your organization. Not only your organization, but all organizations around you. You have the right to be informed of what's going on. You have the right to be informed of how they're doing business, how they're spending their money, how they're doing things. You have a right. You have a right. Those are public entities, and anybody has a right to know what's going on in any of those public entities. So that's pretty much what all this legal jargon means. You just have a right to know what's going on. And that's the reason of the Open Records Act. What is a record? Well, it's pretty much all documents, including books, papers, etc., etc. Now keep in mind that even text messages that have to do with business are subject to this. Emails that have to do with business are subject to this. So pretty much anything where something is recorded when it has to do with business of your organization is subject to the Open Records Act. Disclosure. Anybody can request minutes of your organization. Anybody can request, I believe, the organization's finance report, because you guys are open entities. You guys are public entities. Anybody can request these documents. Anybody can inspect them. It says during regular business hours. Now I know that a lot of organizations don't adhere to a 9 to 5, but just because that an organization doesn't necessarily do their business on a 9 to 5 doesn't necessarily mean that you're exempt. Pretty much the regular business hours of your organization, when your organization does things, I guess predominantly during those times. You're not required to, if somebody asks you for a document or asks you for a record, you're not required to create a record or format that does not exist. Say, for instance, if paper copies are all you got, maybe your minutes go back years, and somebody's requesting minutes of a certain day, you don't necessarily have to give them a digitized copy. If they're requesting a PDF, and then all that you have are pretty much just paper copies, you can just give them a paper copy. You don't necessarily have to go out of your way to give them a certain format, to actually make it a certain format. So pretty much whatever you have will suffice, will have to suffice for them. You don't have to go out of your way to accommodate anything of that nature whenever somebody's actually asking to see your records or wanting to look at your records.
Can you charge them for making copies?
Yes, you can. We're going to get to that shortly. There's, charging fees. Yeah. That's in section 24. The reasonable fee charged for direct cost of searching and copying records may be charged. Mainly, what I always looked at was this 25 cents per page, not in excess of 25 cents per page. You can charge, but you can't charge any more than 25 cents per page if somebody wants to see minutes of like a whole year. Give them copies of the minutes. You have to, but you can't charge any more than 25 cents per page whenever you're copying. Recovery of reasonable direct costs of record copying or mechanical reproduction is also permitted. Reasonable. You can't charge anybody phenomenal amounts of money just to get copies of minutes. That's pretty much what it is. You can't use it as a fundraiser. Charging fees, a notice of fees, a written fee schedule. If you're going to charge fees for copies, that fee schedule has to be given to the county clerk as well whenever you take in your meeting dates every year. Whenever they notarize it, also include the fee schedule, so everybody's pretty much on the up and up on that.
So they just don't go by the act then, with the 25 cents per copy?
Pardon?
That's just not taken at face value, the Open Records Act, 25 cents per copy?
You can-
You have
you-
to actually state it, 25 cents per copy?
You can actually make up your own fees, but you can't go beyond 25 cents
Oh, okay.
per copy. Yeah, you can charge 7 cents or however much it.
Otherwise, you're okay, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, you just can't go beyond 25 cents per page. Yeah. So that pretty much concludes the training this evening. As I said, the bulk of the training was going to be over the Open Meetings Act. The Open Records Act is rather lengthy in there, but quite a bit of that has to do with law enforcement, judicial, stuff like that. And the 501c3s and nonprofit organizations are just a small part of that. But the main thing is transparency. It's there to promote transparency. So, and in doing this presentation, I didn't reinvent the wheel. I actually got this from a PDF that was from the Oklahoma Attorney General, the Office of the Oklahoma Attorney General, and that's what this is right there. So I'll leave that up there for a little bit because that's just my information. If you want to actually consult this, but please remember that anything that is written in that law supersedes anything that's on this PowerPoint or anything that I've said, mainly because I'm not a lawyer. And none of us at CCO are lawyers. Brad, you a lawyer? No, Brad's not a lawyer. So at this time, I'll go ahead and open it up to any more questions. I know that we covered a lot of stuff and it got kind of deep, but I want to make sure that people leave here with the full grasp of this. Any questions out there? Any other questions? All right, Tammy, you got anything?
No, just, if you haven't registered for the conference, we have a registration link that is up. You do have to register everyone that's attending the organization. We need an account for the food. The dates are July 12th and 13th. And so we strongly urge you to go online as soon as you can. It will be at the new conference center this year. And we will probably be one of the first big events that they'll be having. So we're excited about it. Different space, but I think it will be really good this year.
Brad, you have anything?